So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we have a battle given to me by Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud, and this is probably the first really large-scale siege that he's given to me in a couple of months at this point. And they are a little bit of a mainstay of the channel, so it's always good to see one of these pop up. And this is a rather interesting looking map. This is of course in the deserts. It's going to be a duel between Gondor, who are invading Harad, one of the more ornate perhaps Harad settlements this would be, as it's nestled away at the base of these cliffs over here. It's going to be an interesting layout as well, because I do believe the final stand is actually this hill over here that Harad can fall back to, and they can also bank up their archers to shoot at Gondor as they do so, but the rest of the settlement is more of a standard cityscape. There are several areas that Harad can choose to dig into. I suppose they have several options of where to fall back to as well ultimately. But the main assault is going to come from both sides, I believe. I believe there's going to be a fair amount of river crossing action. Indeed there is, so they're going to be attacking from this side over here. And over on the other side, much more simple, because it's going to be a land-based affair with a few choke points, which is fairly standard fare for the initial engagements in what is primarily a cityscape style siege, where we're going to be seeing a lot of street-based combat, a lot of choke points. And it's going to come down as well to how well the defenders can use their skirmishers, how well the attackers can weather that storm. And Harad and Gondor, of course, are a rather interesting matchup, as we've said in the past. Gondor with their higher focus on archers and higher quality units with better base damage means they can do very well against Harad in certain situations, especially in more elongated fights. Harad, of course, have got their melee savagery and armor piercing, which is almost universally useful really against the Gondorians. This is going to be kind of interesting though, because under normal circumstances perhaps we see the Gondorians defending against Harad. On this occasion though, it's going to be the other way around. So can Harad use their archers and of course their javelins, which should be good against Gondor, to full effect? Or will the Gondorians, with their armor focus and just general survivability among the human factions, be able to keep themselves alive enough to be able to push their way through the settlement? It's a 4v4 as well, so Gondor should have access to the higher quality units individually. We shall start off with Mevin, who has got some upgraded Gondor spearmen here on the front line, which even these units are going to be pretty good against the most entry-level Harad units, which I would imagine there are going to be some of those present just to pad out the numbers of the Harad defenders a little bit more so, but for the most part they're going to be here as a defensive bulwark, the first in keeping the attack going with their decent defensive values, and of course when they've got their both levels of their armour upgrades go full plate like this, they are going to have, it's going to take a Harad a while to chew through them without committing some of their nastier units like Trollmen, and of course you always run the risk of exposing them if you commit them too early. Gondor Infantry, much the same sort of situation here. Both levels of armour upgrades will give them that little bit more survivability against the basic Harad units. They'll be better at doing damage in return to the Haradrim as well, but once again they're going to be pretty vulnerable to the armour piercing that Harad have to offer. Which again, like I said, is kind of universal for the Gondorians. There's not many Gondor units that aren't vulnerable to that sort of thing. More Gondor infantry there. We have the Wardens of the White Tower, which is not going to be the General's Bodyguard unit, but this is the best that Gondor can do in terms of dedicated infantry, or dedicated sword infantry I should say. Sort of the ultimate expression really of Gondor infantry. There is a unit of infantry I think that for Gondor that is better, but maybe not so against Harad, because what makes that one so good is the armour piercing that they come with, and here they are. Nimlotti and Honor Guard against most factions, because most factions to some extent or another have got some focus on armour. The Nimlotti and Honor Guard are really, really good. Extra men in the unit, the armour piercing, obviously the defensive attributes that come with being spearmen. But against Harad there's relatively few units that the armour piercing will actually be a huge advantage against, but even still, they're still going to be pretty good to put in the centre of your line to make sure that things are held down nicely. Marksmen of Caerandros I think are a good choice because they can out-skirmish pretty much everything Harad have to offer at long range, the Serpent's Fangs being the only exception there, but they're going to be relatively few in number among the Haradrim roster. And then also the Marksmen are pretty damn good in melee when they pull out their two-handed sword, especially against low armour factions like Harad. So it's a good choice all round I think. Fountain Guardsmen, kind of similar I suppose to the Nimlothians in the sense that armour piercing is what truly sets them apart, but they are also a phalanx unit, so they should be useful irregardless of that as a nice anchor for the line. Veterans of Osgiliath are locked morale, which is very nice, but for the most part elsewise they're going to be really good at being a heavy archer to skirmish with the enemy. They're also a decent line infantry unit when all is said and done as well. I approve of the choice to bring the Ravenhelms over the Axemen of Lasarnak on this occasion. Normally I wouldn't, but Against Harad, I do think they're the better choice because of their higher base damage, and some Citadel Guard at the back. Again, armor piercing, but they're more going to be brought because they're really Gondor's option for a high tier line unit if you want to really invest in that sort of thing, because otherwise you have to go down to sort of your Gondor Infantries to get that sort of unit, and that obviously isn't going to have the same level of quality associated with it. Then we have Windy, good to see him again. He's got some Citadel Guardsmen as well, for the same reason I imagine, just a higher quality front line. The armor piercing is maybe not as good as it would be, but still very good defensive unit nonetheless. A couple of Gondor archers with the armor upgrades as well, not quite as flashy as the Marksman of Caer Andros perhaps, but they should still do just fine against Harad, I would say. And certainly skirmishing and wearing Harad down is one way in which Gondor could approach this battle as it goes along. A lot of Gondor infantry as well, no presence of the spearmen as such, but then doesn't really need them. Maybe there could be a sally out from Harad which could be repulsed with some spears, but I think the infantry are a good choice for fighting in the interior of the settlement. Once again, we're seeing some Ravenhelms, some more Wardens, some more veterans of Osgiliath and Nimlotti and Honor Guard, so plenty of quality. He's also got a unit of Marksman of Caer Andros. Interesting as well to see a couple of units of Pelagia Marines. Now Gondor are not going to be able to defeat Harad javelin to javelin, but javelins are still going to be useful for the attackers here. If Harad do dig into a nice position, Pelagia Marines can really force a response or create the gap that Gondor need to start pushing forward with their heavy duty infantry. A couple of Fountain Guardsmen. We also have a couple of units of the Guards of Osgiliath, which are not the worst choice in this situation. You want to be careful about committing pikes like this too early into a fight, otherwise they will just end up being focused down, but are still a very fine unit of pikemen, which are often overlooked, I think, because of the presence of the Fountain Guard, but let's not forget that the pikes have got more range, so if it does come down to it in the late game, they could be a real difference maker. And then at the back, he has brought a unit of upgraded Axemen of the Sarnak, one of my favourite looking Gondor units, I must say, but still, armour piercing only going to be useful against certain elements of the Harad army. Then we have DF Morris. Been a while since he's been in one of these, I think, but good to see him again. Got some civilians, which may very well be the General's unit, I'm not sure. Also some Mithrandir's retinue, which is an interesting choice. I mean, having a fast mover for a bit of extra utility isn't necessarily the worst idea. Whether or not it's going to be able to pay for itself easily, I'm not so sure. But if Harad do want to try and sally forth with some cavalry, they don't really have anything which can honestly defeat the Mithrandir's retinue easily. Their camels maybe would do okay if you had more than one of them, but even that's somewhat questionable. Axemen of the Sarnak are here once again, Fountain Guardsmen, some more Citadel Guard, we've got some more Gondor Infantry in high numbers, he's brought some Spearmen too, plenty of Pelagia Marines and other ranged units, veterans and marksmen. No, his general is going to be in Nimlotti and Honor Guard. I'd imagine these hidden units here would, at least one of them is bound to be the EITHELian Rangers, which obviously Rangers on the attack can be devastating. It's something that the defenders need to be on the lookout for, because a few good volleys can really undo a lot of your efforts. And finally, we have the Womb Raider, who has got some Gondor Spearmen once again. We've got some Nimlotti and Honor Guard. We've got some veterans of Osgiliath with only the first level of armour upgrade, so bits of their plate armour are missing after their long campaign. But there they are, Gondor Infantry, another unit of Mithrandir's retinue. I think only bringing two may be a little bit overkill for Gondor, but we shall see. Guards of Osgiliath, Ravenhelms are here, and elsewhere we've got some Pelagia Marines, some Citadel Guard, and some Marksmen of Caer Andros. So pretty much standard fare, few differences between the armies, but for the most part, not too much. I mean, Gondor are fairly cut and dry in terms of what they offer, especially in a situation like this. Harad, I imagine it's going to be a similar story. They're going to do their best to put on a front line. I mean, we have Eclipse himself, who is playing as Harad. He's got some Haradrim Spearmen. They're going to struggle against pretty much anything Gondor have in melee, but that's because they're a very low tier unit. They're numerous though, and they can of course buy time for units such as this. The Muhad Beast Hunters, going to be one of the critical units perhaps. They may be rather basic as far as javelins go, but javelins are one area in which Harad can really inflict a lot of pain on Gondor in a situation like this, where Gondor have to advance into them. Southron Warbound, of course, even the more basic Harad units like this have got a bit of armor piercing to their name, which is going to be perhaps something which really adds up over time in this battle against the plate-clad invaders. Trollmen, of course, against a lot of factions, they are one of the things that you really want to be on the lookout for, Gondor especially. Haradrim Spearmen are here, so he does seem to have gone for a more numerous army Eclipse, which is gratifying to see, because a lot of these Southrons can be efficient, and ultimately if it comes down to a fight of pure muscle in melee, even with the armour piercing, based on the fact that it's a 4v4 and Gondor have got more quality, Harad are going to struggle, I think, to keep pace. So these units are really here to hold the line, and then other units such as the devastating Demons of the Desert, Obviously Hashari Stalkers being rangers, standard Hashari as well with their throwing daggers. These are the sorts of units which can really be a problem for the Gondorians, and that they will have to be on the lookout for them. Not to say that Harad are completely devoid of quality in melee, of course there are Southron archers there, but Champions of Nathrat are a very scary unit for the likes of Gondor to have to face down. Artillery, of course, in any siege can be really good, but there's always an element of chance where artillery is involved. And there's more trollmen back here as we get into some Mughad warriors down there from cannon fodder. Good to see him. Dismounted Serpent Guard, Trollmen of Harad. As we look further afield, we've got some Haradrim Spearmen, Southrons, Muhads, pretty much similar as what you'd expect. Dismounted Serpent Guard. So he's gone more in for Dismounted Serpent Guard, which are maybe the most similar to the kind of thing you'd expect from the Western Kingdoms of Men, in the sense that they are significantly more armoured than the other options that Harad have at the higher tier, even though they're still somewhat lacking in that regard. But yeah, certainly the more, I don't know, traditional is maybe the wrong word, but line infantry unit that Harad have, and they'll still do quite well. I mean, 1-to-1 they will beat Gondor Infantry after all, but they are quite expensive and they do have some pretty significant downsides to that, whereas the Gondor Infantry are very well priced for what they offer. Serpent's Fangs will be able to skirmish with the Gondorians better than any other Harad archer can. Champions of Nathrat are here. He's gone for a lot of Mughad warriors as well, so plenty of these line infantry units, both the Muhads and the Serpents. Stalkers, Demons of the Desert, and some more Trollmen. There were, of course, units already positioned on this little corridor towards the hill. Haradrim archers and Southron archers, basic though they may be. They will have to do their part if Harad are to succeed in this endeavour. Then, down here, we have Sin of the Dark Cloud, who's got some Black Serpents. They could sally forth. The Black Serpents are quicker than the Mithrandir's retinue, but they will lose in a straight-up melee fight with them, because the Mithrandir's retinue have got the better defensive stats, and that is all important when it comes to cavalry duels like that, especially when their class of being multiple HP lancers is exactly the same. Hashari Stalkers, Serpent's Fangs, there's more units over yonder. DF Mark has got his entire force over here with some Beastmasters, some Warriors. He's got some Serpent Guard in there as well. Pikes, Haradrim Spearmen. Yeah, pretty much the same sort of thing. There's plenty of basic units with a few bits of quality interspersed throughout. He's actually gone for the armour upgrade on his Serpent Guard as well to perhaps give more parity with the armour-focused Gondorians. And again, they will beat the standard Gondorian infantry, like I said, but they'll struggle against stuff like Citadel Guard. And this is where the Gondorian armour piercing actually will come in handy against these upgraded units. Some Serpent Guard back there. Basic cavalry. I mean, over on this side, the Mithrandir's retinue are not present, so a lot of these fast movers may actually be incredibly useful. Hashari Shadows being mounted rangers, they may actually be better off hiding until much later on, and maybe come in from the rear, but we shall see what the players wish to do with that. More Hashari and Dismounted Serpent Guard. But yeah, there probably will be a little bit of a cut, because Gondor have got to traverse quite a lot of desert, unless Harad do sally out on this side of the settlement with their cavalry quickly, in which case the cut is likely to be fairly small. But yes, I'll make a cut, and we'll rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. So with this we shall rejoin as the Serpent's Fangs over here on this natural wall are starting to bombard the approaching Gondorian troops. As has been said in the past, the Serpent's Fangs are not really a damage focused archer as such. They're a little bit heavier in their approach, a little bit more defensive, and their poison arrows mean that pure damage is not really their forte for their class of unit, but they should do quite well here, attacking into the Gondor archers, who are now going to try and respond in kind. Generally speaking, these kind of longer skirmish fights should favour the Gondorians, and as mentioned in the army composition phases, Gondor of some of the human factions are going to be slightly better at withstanding arrow fire such as this, but it's not really the Haradrim archers that Gondor need to be a little bit more wary of. It's going to be their javelins and the like that are going to be the more dangerous thing. The Black Serpents are also here. Very swift unit of lancers this, so Gondor can't afford to just leave their archers completely out in the open. Otherwise, some swift charges from that cavalry will yield the desired results. They do have some Citadel guarding fairly close attendance, but pushing forward their more elite units such as this will open them up to the arrow fire that they're already sustaining. Not really a huge amount of damage taken by the Gondorians for the time being. You can also see that the Black Serpents, and trying to get away from them actually, the Gondor archers have exposed themselves a little more to the Black Serpents, but rather fortunately the Black Serpents not able to take advantage of that, because by the time they realised it, they were too close to actually get up to charge speed, so neither side getting what they really wanted out of that situation, and so we're back where we started really. business as usual. This is a fairly long battle, so I would imagine that the Gondorians are going to try and take things a little bit more slowly, as well they should. Charging in unthinkingly and hyper-aggressively into a settlement such as this is going to spell disaster for you when you are dealing with a faction that can deal damage as quickly as Harad can, and you don't really have the opportunities or sightlines to take advantage of your own skirmishes to try and exploit Harad's weaknesses. Serpent's Fangs and Southern Archers up here. A few of the Serpent's Fangs have fallen, but really not that many at all. Again, showcasing the fact that among the Harad roster, they are one of the most well-armoured units that Harad can field. They are going to keep responding to the Gondor Archers. Poison arrows, will they come into play? What are they going after? I think they may be going after the Pelagia Marines. It's kind of difficult to tell because most of the shots seem to be landing between themselves and the Citadel Guard, but yeah, among Gondorian units, I suppose Pelagia Marines are one of the more vulnerable to arrow fire. Their armour values are not quite as impressive as most of the rest of the roster, and their shield, while it is present, is also not extremely large. Over on the other side, meanwhile, still a slightly slower approach being taken by the players on this side of the battlefield, but they are still going to be forming up. Maybe a slightly wider choke point to take advantage of over here, but only the one choke point, so different situations, I suspect. Is that an area that the defenders can actually get up to over here? Not entirely sure why you'd want to. This actually seems like the sort of position that the attackers would take advantage of more so. Nice vantage point at the back of the settlement, as well as another route through it. So the defenders will have to be on the lookout for that. I am a little bit concerned actually for the presence of the Harad Hashari shadows over here, because I would imagine that Mevin is probably going to uncover them at some point. And as soon as that happens, they will need to be retreated, because it's not the sort of unit you can really afford to lose for nothing. It is a 4v4, so Harad do have slightly more leeway than they otherwise would in other situations, but even still, far too valuable a unit to lose for nothing. Some of these Gondor archers are a little bit bloodied after their encounters with the Harad archers on the walls. They're still going after the Pelagia Marines and having the desired effect. Several of these javelin men are falling. And as well as taking a slower approach is the way to go here for Gondor. They can't afford to just hang around in range of these archers indefinitely. Like I said, it's a 4v4. Gondor don't have the luxury of a huge numbers advantage that they can bring to bear, so they will need to roll the dice at some point and start stacking up on these entrances. Those Hashari shadows still just about hidden. The Harad front line's still there. A few more of the Serpent's Fangs have fallen since last we've seen them. A few Southron archers up on this wall over here who are yet to start engaging at the moment. Gondor Spearmen moving forward. Gondor Infantry, of course, we've seen both of the basic Gondor units in high numbers in the composition phases. Yes, 2 choke points over here, but they are thinner. I don't know which I would prefer. I guess it depends. I mean, a really aggressive push through the single wider choke point could yield the results you want. It also forces the players to cooperate with one another rather than simply taking their own choke points and sticking to it. We've seen very recently actually the benefits of players mixing and matching their strengths. And you will in the future actually, because one of the Silmarillion replays I've already recorded that will be coming out after this is very much based around that sort of thing for the attackers, both in a positive and negative way. Southern archers are there. We have Beast Hunters taking some hits, perhaps. Yeah, I mean, they're trying to bank their shots, but it's easier said than done, given the present situation. Serpent's Fangs ballooning their shots way high. This isn't going to do a huge amount, to be honest with you. Many of them will miss, and you need volume of hits against a unit that's armoured up, like the Gondor archers here. We said that neither side really getting the most out of their skirmishes at the moment, although Black Serpents, they are multiple HP, but they are going to try and charge in a frontal charge here into the Gondor archers, and that will be somewhat effective. Not a particularly wide charge, so the damage will be limited to the middle of the unit only. But still, the Hashari shadows are somehow still hidden. How does that work then? They're hiding and yet the Gondorians are right there. They must be literal microns away from being uncovered. Crazy. By next time we look, they could have already perished, actually, seeing as, yeah, I mean, that's spearmen, that's infantry, Nimlotti and Honor Guard that way, so it's all melee units they'd have to deal with, rather than archers that they could push their way through. We may see the first engagements of infantry start to happen now. Gondor spearmen starting to make their way inside the settlement. Over here, not a huge amount happening at the moment. Gondor spearmen still leading the way, obviously Gondor leading the way with spears to try and prevent cavalry sally out, such as we've already seen from the Black Serpents. Athelian Rangers getting a bit close to the action. If there were archers ready, they could try and take advantage of their boldness, but as it is, only javelins for the time being. Meanwhile, Windy and Mevin making their way forwards. I mean, Gondor Infantry, they can be exploited a little bit by the armour piercing of Harad, but against the Southrons and basic Haradrim units, these Gondor swordsmen should be just fine, and we do start to see the first melee conflicts in this battle. Gondor spearmen in here. Reinforcements are ready to go as well, which is important. Need to try and sustain these assaults. Windy's still a little bit further back, several of his units a bit further away, so... Well, the Hashari Shadows have been revealed now, so I mean, that's something. Are they going to be able to escape? I mean, they certainly haven't used up much of their ammunition at this point. And this is the thing with trying to hide a unit like this, it can always backfire on you, and broken and fighting to the death, that's a big win for the Gondorians. Like I said, I mean, the Hashari Shadows, mounted rangers like this, the damage and kill counts that units like this can achieve are extreme. So the fact that Gondor has really diffused that before it became a problem is significant. They might return with 13. It kind of depends if they actually route off the red line here or if they continue to skirt the map. I don't know. Either way, it was a gamble that hasn't paid off for the F mark. Gondor will be very pleased with that. Windy offering a little bit of fire support to the initial probing assaults that Mevin is running. Gondor archers trying to do some damage to the Southron archers up here on the high ground. Defeat seems certain for the Gondor Infantry. I think a large part of that has to do with Southron pikemen being involved. I mean, they're very basic, their stats are terrible, but they do have armour piercing, which is very rare for a pike. It's a distinction they only share with the mighty 1st Legion from Khazad-dûm. But the thing with these pikes is they can be very effective as long as their formation isn't buckled, and you can't really buckle their formation when they're being supported by spears and when they're only going up against a singular unit. Javelins are also forthcoming, so this initial little assault here from the Gondorians may not yield much in the way of results. There are some spears in there with them, but for the time being, veterans of Osgiliath also firing away, trying to go after some appropriate targets. They are killing off the Serpent Guard. I don't necessarily know how useful a unit like this is going to be as the battle transitions into being a fully cityscape based fight in the second phase, but veterans of Osgiliath targeting them down nonetheless. Black Serpent's coming back, Hashari Stalkers nearby. Southron Archers trying to offer a little bit of support as well, but so far these front lines not really being tested as much as they inevitably will be. Meanwhile, Gondorians threatening perhaps to move in. A little bit of firepower being brought to bear against the Harad front line that was being set up over here. And Harad are going to move to meet the Gondorians, which is interesting. Again, Southron pikemen forming up the base of this defence, with Haradrim spearmen being their defensive shield. Over here, though, I think the way that the Gondorians have initially set up is more advantageous. Civilians supporting the advance of Gondor spearmen. But numbers-wise and also organisationally, the pikes for Harad over here are less well set than over on the other side, but a little bit of range support can certainly help matters. Southron archers, several deaths already being provided to Harad courtesy of the Gondorian archers. That was always going to be a worry for Harad in this fight. If they can mitigate the damage that Gondor's skirmishers can do on the advance, they should do fairly well. Wardens of Minas Ithil shooting at the Trollmen. Trollmen being committed fairly early here. If they can get into melee quickly enough, then the arrows will be less able to reach them than they otherwise would. And also Trollmen being on the front line represents a real challenge for Gondor. As soon as they get to the front line though, they're being peeled off again. I'm not really sure what the point of that was. Trollmen are a unit which Gondor really can't deal with efficiently outside of trying to burn them down with arrows and javelins of their own. In pure melee, all of Gondor's better units are going to be somewhat countered by the Trollmen and of course by their big brothers, the champions of Nafarat. Yeah, this Harad front line holding on for the time being, but I feel like once they take a few more losses, the pikes will start to waver a little bit, but with an extra unit of Southron Warband, that will certainly help shore things up for now. Windy now also moving in, joining in with his own assault Gondor Infantry, taking the vanguard once again, but on this side we have not only Southron Plankmen, but also the upgraded dismounted Serpent Guard, and we've already mentioned how they are actually a superior line infantry unit to the Gondor Infantry, albeit you do pay for that. They are very expensive. Running contrary to Harad's usual focuses, pretty well armoured for a Harad unit, but now with Wardens of the White Tower coming in, so certainly some real intent being showed by the Gondorian attackers here, and with Ravenhelms also moving to the front line as well. Plenty of arrow fire support coming in, doing damage to the Beast Hunters, which do represent a real threat to the Gondorians. So Windy pushing in actually more aggressively perhaps than his ally Mevin over here, who is now concentrating his force a little bit more so, with some Gondor spearmen that have been committed. But again, there's dismounted Serpent Guard here ready to block their advance, and yeah, these basic rank and file Gondorian units, as much as you can armour them up and make them pretty tough for their tier, their ability to deal damage is a little bit more suspect, and when you're going up against something like the Serpent Guard here, you are unfortunately going to find yourself outclassed. Have any more reinforcements on the way? Perhaps a unit of Gondor Infantry. Gondor Spearmen. I mean, a lot of these units are still pretty far away. I mean, this is the danger. If these attacks start to fall apart quickly, reinforcements are not exactly nearby. Windy has got several of his units nearby, but Gondor Infantry is starting to rout. What sort of units have we got? Serpent's Fangs getting into melee. Dangerous unit in melee, but they are tangling with Ravenhelms now, so not the easiest foe for them to fight by any means. Beast Hunters in behind, still the target of a lot of Gondor's attentions, but they will have racked up a pretty decent kill count for themselves, certainly putting a dent in Gondor's ability to keep contesting this frontline fight. Both sides taking a decent amount of damage in this engagement, but is this the sort of fight that Harad would take? Possibly. If they can be victorious here, that's Wardens of the White Tower and Ravenhelms as part of an assault which ultimately hasn't gained much ground, but I don't know about that. I just think Ravenhelms are wavering. This is the problem. They are mental fortitude being called into question. Pelargia Marines are there, but this was always something Gondor would have to do at some point. You are the attackers. You need to put yourself in there, try and do the business. Meanwhile, Gondor actually have managed to push through this defence pretty quickly. Last time we saw it, Harad's defences were holding pretty firm, but with the application of a more forthright attack with more numbers, Harad were unprepared for that, and Gondor now starting to gain the momentum over on this side, taking some pretty nasty crossfire from the Harad archers, but they continue to pour their infantry in here. There's plenty of room for them to use as well, which will be a concern for Harad. They can try and use their catapults as Gondor moves through here. I mean, there are some blobs, but it's not. I mean, catapult's always a bit of a lucky dip when it comes to what you're able to do. Hitting your own buildings though, so targeting units that are already behind cover. Another big break there for the Gondorian attackers. Pelargia Marines moving forward in the vanguard, which is interesting. I suppose they must have used up at least some of their javelins, you'd hope, because they're not going to do too well in this fight. I mean, they'll do fine against Haradrim Spearmen, of course, but it's more the Hashari that are going to make quick work of these Marines. Gondor Spearmen moving forward. I mean, there are some Trollmen of Harad. Harad need to reorganise themselves pretty quickly here, actually, because otherwise they're in real danger of being forced onto the back foot fairly heavily over on this side of the battlefield. And things are actually going quite well for Harad on the other side, so the other players won't want to retreat too soon. Trollmen will do really well against the vast majority of these units, but if they can get isolated and surrounded, Gondor should be able to defuse them without incurring the kind of catastrophic losses they may have done Mithrandir's retinue getting in behind enemy lines. Harad have got plenty of spearmen, basic though they may be. It is the sort of thing which can be awkward for a unit like the Mithrandir's retinue. They're doing a good job though of cutting down Southron archers for the time being. Muhard beast hunters at the top of the hill. Nice rear charges though. Southron warband would deal with them quite quickly. Other unit of Mithrandir's retinue as well. So yeah, Harad at this point is probably just more of a case of scrambling to try and set up a new front line, to be honest, with the Mithrandir's retinue having this much room to move around, and with easy enough targets such as this. Yeah, those Southron archers surely are going to fall away pretty quickly as a result of this. Yes, a quick strike, so quick that I didn't even realise it was happening. And neither did the defenders by the looks of things. And that's what being very aggressive can get you. If you feel as though the defenders are not really prepared for an all-out assault, you can crush their lines in one fell swoop. Harad gathering up a little bit more strength on this front line, and this unit of Mithrandir's retinue has actually gotten themselves into all sorts of trouble. Several of them falling away. But plenty of Gondorians on this front line. It says they're shaken, but I'm a little bit confused as to why. I mean, it's a relatively even fight over here that has sprung up in terms of expertise, but there's still plenty of Gondorians stretching out beyond the entrance to the settlement. But they may need more units in here, maybe a couple of units of more genuine quality to help really solidify their gains, because there is still a threat. The Hashari dealing with those marines could move forward and inflict the same fate upon the Gondor spearmen. A counter-attack would be a bold choice by Harad, and I feel as though they'll probably go for a more safety-conscious approach first. Hashari Stalkers firing away. Yeah, they're probably going to set up a new front line. I mean, I don't really know what the Hashari Stalkers are firing at. Got a long way to fire, and I don't think the Mithrandir's retinue are the wisest target for a unit of rangers. Meanwhile, Mithrandir's retinue trying to barge their way through Haradrim spearmen. I mean, it's not a risk-free proposition, that, but you could end up routing these, what amounts to Harad militiamen. Ravenhelm's moving in. Ravenhelm should help Gondor be a little bit more dominant in that fight as well. Let's see what's going on over here then. Mevan's assault continuing to take very much the same sort of shape, yet to commit in huge numbers. The Muhard warriors starting to push forward as well. There are still plenty of Gondorian combatants over here, but they're taking up a more passive role, really, parking themselves in the entrance to the settlement and maybe adopting a bit more of a wait-and-see approach whilst keeping the overall attack going. The Muhard warriors are so light on their defensive values that even Gondor spearmen will be able to do a decent amount of damage to them, I think, but there's plenty of them. Meanwhile, Windy's assault is also still going, plenty of damage being sustained by both sides over here. A unit of Muhard warriors coming over to re-shore up this attack. Guards of Osgiliath taking a lot of damage, Citadel Guard moving in. Windy's army, I think of all of the Gondorians, has probably taken the most amount of damage so far, due to being aggressive with his infantry and also being the first to sustain some damage from the Haradrim archers. And again, like we said, Citadel Guard, their armour piercing going to be significantly less useful than it would otherwise be, but they can still fill the role of an upper tier line infantry unit for Gondor. And of course, just based on the tier of unit they are, they will easily be able to dispose of Muhard warriors in melee. And now Mevan also sending over his own Citadel Guard. This front line starting to fall away. Muhard Beast Masters trying to give the Gondorians something to think about as they start to pour through this defence. Javelins doing their thing. Dismounted Serpent Guard heading to the front. Dismounted Serpent Guard, actually one of the units that the Citadel Guard's armour piercing will be useful against, especially with that armour upgrade. So there you go. Hashari starting to fall back. I think at this point Harad will probably start to appraise the situation and think, yeah, we should start maybe pulling back to the centre of the settlement. If you do so now, then you avoid the pain of what a transitional phase in a cityscape battle will bring, where the attackers can really start picking apart the defenders as they run away. Gondor do have some fast movers on the other side of the battlefield as well, which would have been able to take good advantage of that, but fortunately for Harad, they have managed to mitigate the damage somewhat. But I think especially over here, the Gondorians were pretty pleased with how this battle has developed. Still Harad units over here, but there's going to be no escape for them. They are going to be killed to the last man, and Gondor will be able to reform themselves for the next phase of the assault. I was wondering why the frame rate took a nosedive a little bit earlier on, but it's clearly because there was a little bit of building destruction going on. Still a huge amount of units like way further out. Don't necessarily know why, because they're not in immediate danger. With Thrandir's retinue taking the long way around, able to go around the defenders, but I don't know, I think it's the sort of thing that you'd be better off waiting to utilise until later on rather than now, because if you play your hand too early, Harad can respond to it really very, very easily. Trying to push up through this narrow gap is going to be difficult. Harad are prepared, the catapult is here, so it is going to be painful for Gondor, but you know, they've started off well, so the Gondorians do have some credit in the bank, you would suggest. Meanwhile, how is the Harad evacuation going on over here? We'll call it mixed. Gondor continuing to chase down a lot of these units, as is always the way in siege battles like this. These transitional phases are something that the attackers can really take advantage of and really open up a bit of a lead, or maybe claw back an advantage that the defenders have gained. But yes, the Gondorians will be able to do a decent amount of damage there, and they actually do end up routing a unit of fairly healthy Southron pikemen, so if more damage can be done to them, that's a good catch as well. We've already seen, actually, this is probably the first time in a while we've seen the Southron pikemen be fairly effective on these front lines, so to deal with them now will remove a foe that Gondor have already had an awkward time in dealing with. Harad continue their retreat. Still some Hashari over here. Gondorians actually leaving melee with them, which seems like a little bit of a mistake. Rather than try and get some cheeky damage in though, Sin is going to retreat his Hashari for later. Consolidation for the time being is the name of the game. What else do we have going on? Yeah, they're broken and fighting to the death. They're definitely not going to be escaping back and returning from routing for later. Especially now that they're going to try and rout through the entirety of the Gondorian army. Medieval 2 unit logic at its very, very finest. Anyway, I think we will go up to times, maybe even times 6 speed for this, because this is very much a case of Gondor stacking up, but just want to be a little bit cautious before declaring that we're going to make any cuts in this battle. There's still going to be units that are being hunted down. It's a little bit unfortunate. I mean, I don't know if these beast hunters have ammunition or not, but even if they don't, I mean, they do have armor piercing and melee, so they are still a useful unit to have for Harad, even if it's more of a cannon foddery type unit, as they are capable of dealing damage, especially to more basic Gondorian units, such as the one they're fighting at the moment, actually, Gondor Spearmen. Their defensive values are, of course, pretty woeful. But Gondor Spearmen actually not wanting to engage against the numerically superior Muhards for now. Another Southron pikeman falls. Still all of these stragglers that the Gondorians have been able to deal with in these fights. There is actually still a unit of Serpent Guard over here, which is actually going to be victorious against the Gondorians that were left behind. I feel as though this is more of an oversight from the Gondorians than anything. And I suppose from far away, because of the colour scheme, the dismounted Serpent Guard do kind of blend in to the corpses. Interestingly enough, they are wavering, perhaps as a result of the presence of the huge Gondor army that is right near them, even though they are actually going to be victorious against the small pockets of Gondorian resistance that they themselves are facing off against. 67 of them remain there. It's a bit unfortunate for Harad they weren't able to save those either, but Harad can always fall back on really advantageous defensive positions as this battle enters its next stages. These beast hunters really have been left behind. Pelagia Marines, javelins in melee fighting against one another. I mean, I don't know if the armor piercing will be enough for the Beast Hunters to necessarily win this fight. Slight numbers advantage for the Pelargia Marines as well. Pretty much a microcosm of this matchup overall. Is Harad's armor piercing enough to make up for their significantly lower defensive values? What are the Gondorians up to over here? Yeah, Harad already plugging that gap now, so the cavalry will not be able to pass through. EITHEL Rangers trying to do their thing. Plenty of corpses here. Trollmen at the front, Southron pikemen. That catapult is going to be the main danger here for the Gondorians, and I don't know if they actually have anything that they can do about it, really. They can try and shoot at it from long range with all the archers they have remaining, and maybe that will yield results, but it'll take up a lot of ammunition, to the point where they're going to have to sacrifice having ammunition in the late game perhaps. You can see that Harad already sort of future-proofing, with some units already on the central hill, but much of the defenders still waiting for their moment. Still small fights happening over here. Overwhelming force will now be applied to this situation, which I'm surprised it wasn't sooner by the Gondorians, to be honest with you, but there you have it. A little bit further over here. Yeah, I mean, these Serpent Guardsmen are still here. They are wavering still. Still one Gondorian in amongst their ranks. Actually, no, two. What else do they have over here? Do they have a good unit they can take on? Not really, because the Marksmen Kerandros are healthy enough they could beat them. Certainly not Fountain Guard. Ravenhelm's too strong. Yeah, I guess really it's just a case of waiting maybe, and hopefully in the late game you've got something which can attack the Gondorians from the rear. It's better than nothing, I suppose. Beast Hunters routing, yeah, unsurprising that. Lasted perhaps longer than they had any right to, but ultimately still manpower, more manpower for Harad down the drain. Some more routing Beast Hunters. I mean, having a look over here, very similar setup with a very narrow trench-like defensive position that the Gondorians will have to push their way through. I don't think there's any other option. Actually, no, there is by the looks of things. So once again, over here on this side, there are two ways that the Gondorians may choose to push through this area. I mean, the problem over here is you don't have quite the same narrow corridor initially, but you do have the problem of archers up on this wall. In fact, I think this is probably the least appealing of the two options, especially with Hashari Stalkers up there. You're going to take a huge amount of damage, but still having two ways through, even if one of them is only a token force, is still important. I don't think that's the case over here. Yeah, this one is a sheer cliff, so Gondorians over on this side once again have to make do. Actually, no, they do have two, don't they? They have the cliffside paths as well, so they do have two paths to take, but one... I'd still send a force up there, to be honest, because you can put your own archers and you can shoot down into the Harad position. That may actually be the way to try and deal with the catapult, to be honest. We'll go up to times 6 speed now. Because it is going to be a case of waiting, I think, for Gondor to decide on what they're going to do. I mean, it's going to be painful regardless, as is often the way when you're attacking a settlement like this. It's just a matter of taking your casualties wisely. Plenty of reinforcements, still more Hashari Stalkers as well. Plenty of these defensive rangers, which could yet be the ultimate match winners for Harad. What have we got going on over here? EITHEL Rangers taking up position over here. This will require a response really from the Haradrim. And yeah, the Trollman chasing the EITHEL Rangers away. Pelargia Marines making their way over here as well. Marksmen Kerandros are taking a lot of damage by the looks of things, which leads me to believe that maybe it's the Demons of the Desert, and indeed it is. And I don't know if that's necessarily the best use of the Demons of the Desert, but I mean, they've devastated that unit of marksmen, so it is kills, and they are useful in melee ultimately as well, so it's not as if they're a one-trick pony. They do have several uses. The infantry getting ready. The Trollmen of Harad are starting to take losses of their own, however, with the EITHEL Rangers now having a little bit of support. Yeah, the Trollmen don't want to go through withering ranger fire and then taking a volley or two of javelins before getting into melee. They may even still win that fight, but the Gondorians could send forward more reinforcements. They could retreat their javelins and their rangers, so it's not really worth pursuing any further. But they do need to keep units close by just to make sure the rangers can't take a position, say, right here. and take their pick of the Harad defenders down there, which would almost certainly be the catapult and its crew. Now then, Gondorians threatening to move through over here, the Gondor Infantry ready to go, but if they come forward in any sort of force, like I said, those Hashari Stalkers are going to do the business against them. So Hashari are there as well, with their dancing floating swords, which presumably will be gone come the next patch, but it's become a real part of their identity at this point. The Trollmen are ready in formation as well. An organised defensive unit is perhaps not what you would normally think of the Trollmen as. You think of them more as line-busting, aggressive units. But on this occasion, they will do just fine at holding the line against these rank-and-file Gondorian units. Are the Gondor Infantry going to move forward? I mean, they're not going to win. Definitely not. So, it is a question. I wonder if you can get to that beach over there for Harad. You could do some damage by attacking into the side, so I'd assume that Windy then is going to take the aggressive attack over here, although he's waiting for the time being. Still, I think the Gondorians are puzzling through how best to do this. I mean, once they make their move, they need to do so in unison, really, to have the best results against Harad, and maybe opening up with a little bit of skirmishing to soften Harad up first is the way to go. Like I said, if you use up more of your ammunition now, you're not going to have it for the inevitable final assault, really, on the hill at the end. But I don't know. I mean, I think maybe trying to gain a bit of a lead now is actually the way to go for Gondor. Beast Hunter there, Pelagia Marines maybe? Are they trying to fire? I don't know. They're certainly trying to form themselves up into a position where I don't necessarily think they've got the angle. Looks like we do have a melee engagement over here, which is inevitably going to go fairly poorly, I think, for the Gondorians, with Hashari offering support to the Trollmen. These basic Gondorian soldiers not going to be the sort of thing that you want facing up against the Trollmen in melee, really, if you want a nice, efficient engagement. Trollmen with plenty of motivation as well, fighting on home turf such as they are. On top of that hill there, Hashari Stalkers waiting. We're at kind of the halfway point of this battle as well, with the first layer already gone, the second layer now starting to get underway. Having a look at the kills, I mean, it is still fairly even. Harad technically are losing, but this is where their superior defensive position should be the great equaliser, and it will likely be fairly even going into the final stages, I would imagine. Ravenhounds pushing their way to the front line. I mean, to be fair, Ravenhounds are probably one of the better Gondorian units they have at trying to fight the Trollmen in a pure melee fight, because they can actually do a decent amount of damage to the Trollmen in return, but not to the same rate that they will be taking it. The Ravenhounds, after all, among heavy swordsmen, still a fairly armour-reliant unit, as is often the way with the Gondorians. Veterans of Osgiliath taking a ton of damage. I mean, they're a very good skirmish archer usually, but they're taking damage in melee with some of their units straying into the melee fight, and they're taking a lot of arrow fire as well. Volume of fire, very important. I think Windy is starting to make his way forward now as well. Slightly disjointed nature perhaps to the Gondorian assaults. I mean, some have gotten underway before others. In come the Mithrandir's retinue, able to charge into the Trollmen of Harad, who are actually pretty much completely gone, that one unit of Trollmen, so that's a good catch by the Gondorians. Only 3 of them remain. Mithrandir's retinue still taking a pretty decent amount of damage as they do so, but not really something they will be too concerned with. And there's still Hashari Stalkers, as Marksman Carandros shooting across over here. Over on this side of the battlefield, I have to say, I think the Gondorians are doing a pretty good job at doing these little bits of incremental damage with their archers. X-Men of Lasanak. Catapult is ready, but I mean, the catapult is only going to be used if Gondor come forward in a big blob, which naturally Gondor will be very reluctant to do as long as the artillery maintains its position. It's also very close to the front line. This one little unit of trollmen is now going to be completely surrounded and destroyed by the Gondor Infantry. Wardens of Minas Ithil taking hits from the Hashari up on the side over there. Wardens of Minas Ithil have actually taken a fair amount of damage themselves, so neither side has been too shy about committing forward some high tier resources in this fight, which is good to see. Across the way, Windy's assault now getting underway. Gondor Infantry once again forming up the initial wave. Some Guards of Osgiliath coming in to help shore things up. I mean, having a look at the composition of these defending units, there aren't any trollmen in there, just basic Muhards, Haradrims and Southrons, so just a couple of units of genuine quality, and Gondor would likely be putting a pretty decent amount of strain on this Harad front line. Over here, meanwhile, is where Harad were really doing a pretty decent amount of damage to Mevon's forces. And they are continuing to push back. I mean, these trollmen are going to have racked up a very impressive kill count indeed, I would imagine, and throwing more Gondor spearmen at the situation is probably not going to be sufficient to remedy the situation. Some Hashari still alive as well. Very few veterans of Osgiliath left. I don't know, is there any high quality units that can be committed? I mean, Citadel Guard aren't really the option. Maybe Fountain Guard could be. They do have that phalanx after all. The armor piercing still isn't going to be that useful, and also if the trollmen get up close and personal, the Fountain Guard really won't enjoy that. With a second unit of trollmen, this is likely to be a continuing painful situation for Mevon and his army. But someone has to be the fall guy in a situation like this, and you need to keep attacking to make sure the resources of the enemy are continually directed at you and not your allies, whereas over here, Windy needs to commit forward a few more units, I think. I mean, there are some trollmen over here as well. Such a problem for the Gondorians, really, when you think about it. They have so few options for dealing with the trollmen outside of their ranged units, and if you can't get a good shot on them, your only option, really, is to just try and overwhelm them in melee, which is naturally going to result in plenty of casualties for yourself. Another unit of trollmen being committed forward to this fight over here. In this case, though, it does look as though maybe overwhelming force from the Gondorians may prevail in the end. I'm not sure why these trollmen actually broke ranks and attacked forward, to be honest with you. Well, either way, I think the Gondorians should be able to take advantage of that. Do we have push on the cliffs over here? I mean, Harad's still in control of this area. Marksman Andros continuing to fire in. And the Demons of the Desert are a juicy target indeed, so they should continue to fire, really. Muhard Beast Hunters moving forward, perhaps out of ammunition, now being used as a makeshift infantry unit to try and interrupt the Gondorian firing lines. A blank shot. And they will now retreat, interestingly enough. So Harad largely victorious up here. In this second phase of the fight so far, I think Harad will be reasonably pleased with how it's gone. I mean, it's not gone perfectly, but I do think they've had the better of the engagements. Yeah, that unit of trollmen dealt with. Wardens of Minas Ithil, just the odd pot shot into the Harad lines. What's going on over here? Out of ammunition, Marksman Andros. This is where they can really earn their pay. After using up their ammunition, doing damage to the Harad from afar. The Haradrim from afar. They can now back that up by also using their blades in melee. Axon of Lasarnak also moving in. I mean, looking a little bit more promising for the Gondorians over here now. More arrow fire, Pelagia Marines taking a decent volume of fire there from the Southron Archers. Southron Archers are very, very basic as far as their abilities go, but Pelagia Marines, like we've already said, probably one of the softer Gondorian targets, so if you're going to hit something, it may as well be them. Continuing to take losses. Beast Hunters still at the top of this cliff. How much in the way of reinforcements they have left? I mean, some, but not a huge amount, you'd have to say. They do need to get through here with armies intact after all, because there is still a further defensive position that Gondor are going to have to try and deal with later. Still trollmen over here. Gondor seem to have made some gains in terms of yardage, but yeah, and there's also champions of Nafra over here, so really no rest for the weary. When we have a look at the ending splash screen, I can only imagine that the damage that Sin has been able to do with these trollmen is going to be extremely substantial. We're also starting to see the clear projectiles of the Ashari Stalkers getting utilised. So Mevin, he does still have a fair few reinforcements that he can commit forward, but it's, again, not a limitless supply in much the same way that Windy's army has started to take a little bit more in the way of losses. So the more that this goes on, as much as the patient approach from the Wound Raider and Morris on the other side has worked for them so far, if their allies start to take too much in the way of damage, they're going to need to step it up a little bit and start to be a little bit quicker. I know that the catapult makes that a little bit more awkward. Hit there into the Pelagian Marines. From this, trying to kite the catapult around a little bit. I'm surprised they're going after the Pelagian Marines and not going after the Gondor Spearmen right in front of them, because they're so densely packed that one hit would be enough to remove a huge amount of the combat effectiveness of this unit. Not a huge amount of damage being done though. Some routing pikemen. Breaking discipline. Harad with the yeah, like this is the problem. Like I've said that the Gondorians would have benefited greatly from this position over here. But the same is also true of Harad, and they've positioned a unit of Southron archers to rain some arrows down upon the Gondorians, and you can see that Gondor, over on this side of the battlefield, still have a lot more in the way of reinforcements that can be committed forward. So, again, a little bit more pace, expediency is required, because even if your allies over on this side do start to turn things around, which is looking increasingly unlikely, Windy was making progress, but that was always going to be temporary if Harad were going to commit more reinforcements, and indeed they have. And Cannon Fodder is the one marshalling the line over on the other side, so it's a sign that he feels comfortable enough to take resources off of that front line because things are progressing too slowly for the attackers, and send them over here instead where they're needed more immediately. And Windy is the one that's ultimately paying the price for that. And again, it's at the hands of more Trollman. Citadel Guard being committed forward, Fountain Guard, so not just sending in units one by one at least, but I really don't know if this is going to be enough to reverse their fortunes. How about Nevin? How is he getting along now in his unenviable task? This particular defensive position, very difficult to make your way through, and kind of as expected, especially now with the champions of Nafra on the front line, the Gondorian efforts seem to be collapsing over here. Dancing swords, foul sorcery indeed. March the Carandrus maybe trying to get into position. More units ready to be committed. Citadel Guard, first one's in, not surprisingly because they're shielded. With more arrow fire that would be very detrimental to the continued existence of the Fountain Guard. Heavy armour or no. 82 champions of Nafra still alive. Still plenty of trollmen as well. Reinforcements ready to go as well. Beast Hunters and Hashari capable of mucking in melee should the need arise. Harad retreating from that particular situation as well. Are we going to see a little bit more? I mean, this is actually a counter-attack from Harad, if anything. These units were in this position anyway from the Gondorian perspective. This unit of Southron pikemen will be butchered, so that's something for the Gondorians to hold on to, and then they need to then snowball that momentum into a full-blooded attack, I think, on this position here. The catapult is scary, but if you continue to be so passive, I feel as though your allies are going to fall, and then Harad should be able to open up the kind of lead that will allow them to go on to win the fight. Horns of Minas Ithil trying to kill off more of these Hashari, who in turn are using their throwing projectiles to kill off a few more of the Gondorians that will make up what will eventually be an assault over here, I would assume. Over here, Southron archers burying a lot of their ammunition into the floor. How much of it was a blank shot, so we may never know. Very makeshift. Why is that? I say makeshift actually. There's another unit of Trollman over here. They seem to be everywhere, but that's a sign that the defenders are using them well. Bear in mind that the defenders will have less money per army to play with than the attackers in a 4v4, so their armies are not going to be wall-to-wall elite units, as has been the case throughout really. They've been really good at using and committing their high-tier units where they've been needed. This may be an example of such, to be honest. Committing another unit of Trollmen over here would maybe be enough to prevent the Gondorians from once again making a few inroads over here in this position, although there are actually Trollmen already over here. Citadel Guard are there, the Trollmen taking damage. I mean, the one downside to the Trollmen, I suppose, is once that hit point has been expended, their defensive values are not particularly good. They do have a shield, and that's not going to help them so much in melee against this calibre of unit. And with Nimlotti and Honour Guard on the way as well. Fountain Guard pushing forward. This is a bit of a ray of sunshine for the Gondorians at this point. I don't know whether Windy has got a huge amount of units left that he can commit, just one actually, but if he commits that unit of Fountain Guard as well, it's then really in the hands of his allies whether or not they can take full advantage of this. There's another unit of Trollmen in reserve though. So it is a dangerous situation. This unit of Citadel Guard broken and fighting to the death. Mevin continuing to be bullied by Sin's Trollman Goon Squad over here. Further down, Mevin at least does have more reinforcements he can commit forward, but he's probably reluctant to do so given the hugely disadvantageous situation he's going to be in if he does so. The Gondorians do finally make their way forwards, the catapults starting to fire. I don't know about this. I mean, they're in a very dense formation, they're getting slightly surrounded. They're going to need at least one more unit. I mean, none of these units in combat, Muhar Warriors, Southron Pikemen, of course, in the way the pikes always are, can be a little bit of a problem, but a unit of genuine quality that gets in and amongst these units over here would certainly be enough to start turning them back. This is a little bit more like it, a little bit of hope perhaps that the Gondorians are going to steal themselves from advance. And I don't know whether Eclipse is going to be able to get the catapult off the front line at this point, because in turning them around they would actually enter melee with the infantry units that are already here. Catapult crew. Demons of the Desert taking hits. They might be out of ammunition though, given that we've already seen them use their ammo, so it's kind of an interesting choice of a lightning rod for ranged unit attention. But if it works, it works. More Hashari being committed forward. This is a lot more like it now. There's more genuine assaults happening on more than one position. Windy's, Nimlotti and Honour Guard pushing forwards. The other unit of Trollmen being committed. Fountain Guard are here. This unit of Beast Hunters looking like they might rout at any moment, facing off against Gondor's finest. This unit of Trollmen as well, actually struggling a little bit more against the Fountain Guard, but ranged support coming in from multiple sources, including the Hashari Stalkers. So Windy will be in danger of his whole army collapsing if his allies don't start to make inroads. We've already seen such from the other side. It does look as though as well that they have chosen now to make a coordinated retreat. Even though Sin was winning over there, I think he sees the writing on the wall and is going to retreat, so Mevin will be able to claim this territory. And doubtless he will be continued to be harassed by these units up on these cliffs. I'd be very surprised if this unit of Gondor Spearmen continued its ill-fated advance. They're throwing their lives away if they do. But surrounding this unit of Hashari is a different matter. Throwing their projectiles into that unit of Gondor Spearmen, actually killing none of them, which is interesting. 0 kills inflicted from an actual volley. It wasn't just like a couple of the unit that used their throwing projectiles, it's pretty much all of them. Hashari Stalkers continuing their thing. Chaos is starting to reign over here. I mean, charging in with their camels. As soon as it comes down to melee though, the Beastmasters are going to get absolutely demolished by Nimlotti and Honour Guard. But the charges are at least providing food for thought for the Gondorians. Trollman kind of isolated at this point. Windy's done pretty well with a largely depleted army here, but obviously it does mean that his contributions in the late game are going to be hampered, but that's where Morris and the Wing Raiders armies are going to have to come in. They are significantly healthier over here on the east side in comparison to their allies over on the west. Guardian Marines moving forwards. Shari Stalkers also being caught out as well. I don't know whether they still had ammunition, but if they did, that is another very important catch from the Gondorians. Rangers, especially in the late game where they're going to have to advance up that hill, Rangers in the right position can demolish an army in a situation like that. I don't know. Could prove to be a problem. Beast Hunters and Hard Warriors routing from the front, so yeah, now with an application of overwhelming force, the second layer is going to start to fall away, and this is perhaps where Gondor can recoup some of their losses by taking advantage of these transitional phases, as attackers always can, although the distance that the Haradrim have to travel is somewhat lower, but actually, to be fair, the Gondorians have already cut off the escape route though, with Mevin in position. A few Hashari being killed off, so yeah, anything that hasn't already retreated to the corridor that leads to the hill is now trapped back here, and it's really just a case of how efficiently Gondor can deal with all of the stragglers. Granted, I think it's 2 units of Trollmen, which to be fair, the fact that those haven't retreated, while they are going to be fairly awkward to deal with just generally, the fact that they're not going to be manning the front lines is going to be a welcome sight for Gondor. I'm going to look at that defense over there. It does look intimidating down the trench, but time will tell how the Gondorians deal with that, whether they have the manpower to withstand the damage Harad are inevitably going to throw at them. Defeat seems certain for the Trollman. There's a few dismounted Serpent Guard in here as well, but I think we've showcased probably the best choice here for Gondor if they have to fight a unit like the Trollman straight up is the Fountain Guard, just because of their ability to keep the Trollman a little further away. Trollmen are going to be able to land fewer of their hits against a unit like this, but it's still not great for Gondor. I don't think that cost effectiveness is the sort of thing you're ever really going to have against the high-end Harad infantry units, unless you can use your skirmish as well. Mavin's Wardens of the White Tower there. A Harad general falls. Of the two factions who are probably a little bit more susceptible to the loss of their general, but given that the Gondorians are on the attack, you would imagine that morale shocks would affect them just that little bit more. Yeah, Mevin coming over here, making sure that overwhelming force is applied, and as few Gondorians are lost in dealing with the stragglers as humanly possible. Yeah, and when you can get in and amongst the Trollmen and overwhelm them like this, their lower defensive attributes do come to the fore, and they do fall away pretty fast. It's going to be that by the looks of things. Beast Hunters fleeing. They're not going to get very far there. So Windy and Mavin finally victorious. The one unit of Trollmen that's over here claiming the high ground, fatiguing the Gondorian troops as they do so, but they are turning around and they will fight to the bitter end. So we've got another unit of Marks and Carandos. Yeah, they really ought to be trying to surround this unit of Trollmen at this point. Take away some of their melee defense that they do have. Deal with them as quickly as they possibly can. Haradrim Arch is not the scariest thing, but just having a cursory glance over what this side of the Gondorian assault still has. I mean, that's a fairly decent looking army, including some higher end units as well. All of these units back here are routing, but yeah, Gondor still have the numbers to mount a very effective assault. Just having a look at this, Harad are still technically 3 percentage points behind in spite of really clawing some back in phase 2, but the final phase is going to be all important here because Harad presumably have the resources left to do damage to Gondor really very quickly. is that going to be enough to lead them to victory? I wonder. Been a bit of a mixed bag so far. I think Harad have approached this battle very, you know, fairly typically for a defender. For the Gondorians, though, it's really been one of those cases of, is the slightly disjointed nature of when the attackers were attacking and how aggressive they were being, what tools they were using, is that going to be a big difference maker come the end? I mean, it can be, we've seen it happen before, but I don't think it's been absolutely... It's not been like a shocking level of disparity from the Gondorians, but it might be just enough to the point where Harad can be victorious. I'm surprised the Athelian Rangers are using up their ammunition like this, but perhaps even the Haradrim archers here, they just want to take the sting out of Harad's ranged presence in this final part of the battle as much as they possibly can. And of course Haradrim archers are going to die in droves to Athelian Rangers, and actually that's a pretty good angle for the Athelian Rangers overall. So there you go. And the Trollmen of Harad, I think we will actually go up to ×2 speed for this little part of the battle. Trollmen won't have the numbers. The Citadel Guard should be more than enough to deal with this pocket of resistance. Hmm. 11 against 42. Trollmen would usually fancy their chances in a fight like that. Gondor just about to get mobilising down there. Or mobilised, I should say. How many of these? I mean, Citadel Guard aren't taking many losses at all, but that's maybe because the Trollmen are actually being stun-locked into oblivion here. Most of them, anyway. One Citadel Guardsman does fall. But yeah, it's a bit of a foregone conclusion, really, that one. Yeah, you can see here immediately the Harad firing squad's starting to open up. Most of these are actually basic archers, so we'll see if Harad has made the right choice in the units they've saved for the end here. Perhaps out of necessity they use some of their high-profile skirmishes earlier on. Gondor Spearmen? Yeah, I was going to say, a frontal charge with the Black Serpents here maybe isn't the way. Dieth Marker's got his Shari Stalkers in a perfect position really to shoot right down the trench, and also with the crossfire being set up by the basic archers as well, it is going to be a punishing road for Gondor, but as I said earlier on in the fight, Gondor are a resilient faction. That may be an attribute which can lead them to victory here. Meanwhile, still the Trollmen cling on, and even a depleted unit of Citadel Guard like this could end up being extremely important come the end of the fight. Getting parried consistently there, this one Spearman. Well, that'll be the last we see of him. Now then. The fight begins, a full-blooded melee encounter already underway, and the final phase begins. It's a long battle though, so it makes sense perhaps that it isn't within the final 10k frames as per usual. Close enough though, I would suggest. And it's going to come down to whether Harad have got enough ammunition and the right kind of ammunition to be able to stop Gondor here, because just having a cursory glance around things here, I mean, they have enough to lay on a decent defence, certainly, but I think in terms of numbers the Gondorians would have it, and too much of the Harad line is going to be made up of these more basic units as well, which are not going to be up to the task of facing Gondor's finest. Champions of Nathrat and the like will be. Marksman Kerandros in position. Haradrim archers taking an already decent amount of damage. Obviously Gondor themselves have got their own archers as well, which at this point they need to try and use them as best they can. They're not going to have really nice shots in the same way that the Haradrim are, but Harad is still vulnerable to arrow fire, and as Gondor you need to try and exploit that as best you're able. Some Trollmen already committed to the front line. Also the unupgraded Serpent Guard from Cannon Fodder, making up what what Harad have as an armoured unit to try and offer a little bit more solidity. I mean, Demons of the Desert represent such a dangerous unit as well. They and the Hashari Stalkers could very much be the reason why Harad could yet go on to win this battle. Just having a look there. Yeah, and there you can see that was the Demons of the Desert volley. Several of the units around him perishing. I mean, poison arrows in this situation as well from the Serpent's Fangs. If the Gondorians do start to waver, the poison arrows are the sort of thing which will push them over the edge, and a mass rout could be another way in which Harad could win this. One's and Minister Field moving forward. Looks like they still have ammunition, but got their bows drawn anyway, although not every unit puts their bow away when they go into melee. Some of them wield it in the offhand, very much like the Gondor Archers actually. Citadel Guard victorious. Full units of Guards of Osgiliath as well, which, I mean, they could be very, very useful, but only if the Harad defenders don't have the ability to simply shoot them. Very close to the final 10k frames now, and I mean, this is pretty much it. This slog is going to be what determines the victor. I can't help but feel as though the Gondorians are going to be punished pretty roundly here by the kind of skirmishers they still have left. Hashari Stalkers, what are they firing at? They still have 2 units of them, so they can afford to be maybe a little bit more liberal with their use. And of course, it's incumbent on the Gondorians to commit enough resources to this fight to make sure the attack keeps going. So they can't afford to be too stingy, even in the face of those rangers. I think at this point you just have to kind of throw caution to the wind, maintain a certain level of manpower on the front line and hope that that is enough. The only skill that's going to be involved here from Gondor really is trying to position your own skirmishers to try and do just that little bit of extra damage to the Harad front line, or whittle down their skirmishers a little bit to give you the edge you need to carry that momentum forward. And you can see already that in spite of the damage the Gondorians are taking, their frontline efforts still seem to be going better than Harad's. Harad do have a few units they can still commit to the fight, but not that many. Some dismounted Serpent Guard, I still think the Demons of the Desert. There were some Champions of Nafarat around here as well. Out of ammunition archers can always get in the way. There's always kind of panic stations when you see that start to happen. Marksman of Caer Andros taking hits, poison projectiles, but again, throwing the Black Serpents into a fight like this is a real sign of desperation when most of the Gondorian line is going to be made up of stuff like Citadel Guard, because they're going to fall quickly. And it does cost you your general's life as well. Southron Archers broken and fighting to the death. This is kind of what I was fearing. As scary as this position is, it's kind of meaningless if the Gondorians can just batter their way through your defences in the way that they currently seem to be doing. Their morale is holding together quite nicely. The Champions of Nafarat are on the front line, but they're largely holding things down on their own at this point, which is a problem. Harad's skirmishers really need to earn their salt now. Demons of the Desert can certainly do that fairly quickly. They don't necessarily have the angle. Those Harad Marchers are almost certainly going to rout basically as soon as they enter melee. Champions of Nafarat still doing their best on the front line. Demons of the Desert trying to position themselves just so. There's another unit of Champions of Nafarat as well, so I mean, they do still have units, Harad. How much of them still have ammunition though? Is a question that this observer would ask. This unit of Harad Archers surely is going to rout very quickly. They actually stabilised for a little while there, but now they're shaken once again, and now they're wavering. Back to shaken. Can't quite make up their mind. I mean, they're going to die in droves even if they don't rout, so it's kind of a moot point really. All of these out of ammunition archers. Nimlotti and Honor Guard taking hits from the Demons of the Desert, which is not ideal from a Gondorian perspective, but now another large wave of the attack seems to be forthcoming. Balance of forces is evenly matched. One player admits defeat. I wonder who that could be. Not Cannon Fodder, not Mark. Not Eclipse, he still had some units sequestered away at the top of the hill. For reasons unknown. I mean, at this point the hill I think is somewhat irrelevant. If you lose this position over here, considering what you've already committed, the battle is over, so you need to front load from here on out and hope that it's enough. Ranger ammunition being traded back and forth. It's a shame we don't have in a replay that feature where you can click on your faction button and it causes the units to glow either blue or red, depending on which side they're on. It lets you know really what's happening on a granular level when you can see people pushing through the lines like this. Ones of the White Tower getting in and amongst the Demons of the Desert now. Demons of the Desert perfectly capable of looking after themselves in melee, but the Gondorians are going to overwhelm this front line at this point, and I don't know, do they really have enough? What's this at the top of the hill? Single unit of Southron archers? Those archers could also be left behind. Maybe that's the sort of thing, these transitional phases where Harad units have been consistently cut off, is that going to prove to be one of the decisive factors in deciding the outcome of this fight? Champions of Nafrat moving downhill. Bit of a counter-attack. I mean, they'll kill off veterans of Osgiliath with relative impunity. Gondor, I mean, yeah, they need to keep the momentum going, really. They can't afford to hang around for too long in the sights of all of those Harad archers that still have ammunition, because they'll take a lot of unnecessary damage in so doing. A lot of those units getting caught up on that blob as well, which is a problem, because there's still Hashari stalkers, and the longer they hang around there in that blob, the more likely it is that these Hashari units are going to do the business against them. Gondor Infantry facing off against the Harad archers. Another unit sent up that way would almost certainly bring about their demise. More units being sent down. Having a look. Yeah, it's still 4% in favour of the Gondorians. I mean, it's not impossible, I suppose, that Harad skirmishers could do the damage necessary to bring that back around, but I'm not so sure about that. Harad archers, because of the sheer numbers advantage they have, going to be enough to defeat the Gondorians here. But just one unit sent up here in support would be enough to completely change that. One unit of decent numbers at the very least. There's plenty of very depleted Gondorian units that still exist on the field. Elsewhere, Demons of the Desert. Victory is almost a certainty for the Demons. There's still the unupgraded dismounted Serpent Guard as well in here, fighting alongside Serpent's Fangs. Plenty of elite units on display here. Fountain Guard scurrying their way up the hill. They've been a very important part of the Gondorian effort, as they often are. Gondorian General Force. It's been a very close battle, this, though. Neither side has had a distinct advantage throughout. I think going into the final phase, when that initial Harad line started to falter down here, you got the sense that the momentum was shifting in Gondor's favour, and this late on it's difficult to reverse that, so I don't know. Having a look, still 4%, so Gondor are not stretching their lead, but neither are Harad really mounting a comeback as such. Rajam Archers still winning that fight down there. Gondor still have a few units of reinforcements that they can commit forward should the need arise. Serpent's Fangs, things are a little bit chaotic. I don't know who that suits. I mean, I guess with superior numbers at this point it would suit the Gondorians, regardless of whether they are phalanx heavy or not. Bolder than a rooster. Guards of Osgiliath still fairly healthy as well. Late game pikes, another thing which Harad I don't think are going to be able to counteract at this point, because I don't think they have the skirmishers to do so. I guess they do in the shape of these Hashari stalkers, but they are being hunted ruthlessly by shielded and unshielded Fountain Guard. There's still that unit of Southron archers further up the hill. Is that the last Harad general?
We must look to our own soldiers for victory now.
It may very well be. And with that, I think it's fairly clear that the Gondorian invasion effort is going to be a success. What's going on here? A singular rider remains. Mithrandir's rescue, fairly useful early on actually in that first layer. Certainly a very useful tool that both Morris and the Wound Raider had at their disposal. As far as individual units go, I think it's hard to look beyond the Trollmen as a singular source of effectiveness, but I think the rank and file of Harad struggled perhaps against the superior equipment and discipline of the Gondorians, where the elite of Harad are always going to be pretty good against them. When you have less money to work with, such as Harad had here, being on the defence in a 4v4, the Gondorians able to leverage more of their quality here in the late game. Looks like Karandros doing their thing. I really don't think there's much else. I mean, it really is just a case of cleanup at this point. So many phalanx units, Harad clinging on. Further uphill, the Hashari Stalker's broken and fighting to the death. Any lingering, very faint hopes extinguished with the loss of any rangers, unfortunately, for the Southrons. It's been a long battle, this, but the Gondorians will be victorious with not a huge amount of their army left. Yeah, it seems about right. It'll be 7-8% the difference in the end. Most of that, at least half of that advantage coming when Harad had basically already lost the fight, and it was just Gondor dealing with the remnants. A well-earned victory, I think, from Gondor. The slightly disparate nature in which they handled themselves. I mean, like I said, caution was always going to be warranted in this situation. And it wasn't enough to undo their efforts, shall we say. As for Harad, I mean, in a situation like this, I don't think anyone played particularly badly on a macro level. I mean, there's just individual decisions overall which are going to build up, which resulted in this result. Resulted in this outcome, I shall call it. And that is going to be that. A good fight though, and it's been a little while since we've seen one of these larger scale sort of custom sieges that Eclipse has provided to us. Always good to see, and an interesting map as well. A difficult map to take actually, plenty of really good defensive positions, so it shouldn't really go unheeded that the fact that Gondor played pretty well in their organisational way. Sadly, we won't actually get to see the kill counts because the replay simply finished. I don't know whether that was because of a crash or something. But it doesn't matter, the Gondorians were victorious anyway, and we can infer what some of the kills would have been like. Rangers probably getting a lot of kills from the defenders as well as their trollmen, of course. Probably less than stellar kill counts on their lower tier units, which is one of the main difference makers here. The Gondorians wouldn't have been able to see their kill counts anyway, because we were viewing this from the perspective of a Haradrim player. And yeah, it is one. Sadly, we won't get to see that, but there we have it. A very fun siege. I don't know whether you can hear those sirens. I kind of hope not. Fairly close by, but then I do live near a hospital, so it really can't be helped. But yeah, nice to see. Hopefully we'll see a few more of these Eclipse battles. I was actually going to be a part of one, but unfortunately players desynced not too long ago. So that one, maybe it'll be rerun at some point. And indeed it would be kind of a follow-up to the Arnorian themed pitch battle that we had somewhat recently, I think. More of a sort of Dunedain inspired ruins siege, but we might see that one again at some point in the near future, or maybe not. It kind of depends on how things develop. Irregardless, this is going to be the last battle that I record until a couple of weeks' time, because I'm going to visit home for a couple of weeks on leave. That should be a good thing. It means, of course, I won't be able to record while I'm away, but I have built up a decent backlog to the point where I wouldn't actually be able to keep my schedule going if, as on returning, I was immediately asked to go on a 3-week trip. But we'll see. There's it's a fluid situation. If that is the case, then I will of course let people know, and I'll try and put something in place. But But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It's one of those situations I don't really have a huge amount of control over, but hopefully not for too much longer. Irregardless of that, that'll be the sort of thing which we go through in the planned live stream follow-up channel update thing that I want to be doing at some point in May, or if I get sent away in May, then that will have to be pushed back till June, like the vast majority of things. Few other replays that I've got going on. Obviously there will be a couple of Silmarillion replays that follow this battle. I've also been given a battle on EITHEL, which is good, a battle on the Old Forest Road, a free-for-all on the Rovanian Great Lakes, so a few Reforged battles, a few Silmarillion battles. Of course we still have the bracket videos, which as I'm visiting home I won't be able to record any of them, but those will be continuing. It's just a case of, you know, when rather than if. And yeah, there's just a couple of things. I've also got another battle on Austin Airy, but that one will wait a little bit because obviously it wasn't too long ago that we saw a replay on that battle, but it's also, you know, another one in the chamber that we can save until later. But yes, big thank you to Eclipse for sending this battle replay to me. Long may they continue. Big thank you to all the players for being a part of a high quality battle. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.